Look around you right now. The Earth spins on its axis. The Earth orbits the Sun. The Sun circles the center of the Milky Way. And even our vast galaxy is rotating through the depths of space. Zoom down to the smallest scale imaginable. Subatomic particles carry a fundamental property called spin. Everything rotates. Absolutely everything. And yet, somewhere along the way, you were handed a beautiful, comfortable lie about how all of this spinning began. You were told the universe started with a single great explosion, a perfectly uniform, flawlessly symmetrical expansion outward in every direction. But stop and think about that with pure, cold logic. If you take a perfect sphere and expand it into a perfect vacuum, every part moves outward in a straight line. Nothing magically begins to rotate. Symmetry cannot manufacture rotation. For something to start spinning, there must be an imbalance, a fundamental imperfection baked into the original design. Physics hands us an iron law called the conservation of angular momentum. The rotational force in a system cannot be created from nothing and cannot simply vanish. It transfers, it persists, it compounds. So here is the question no textbook dares to answer directly. If the birth of our universe was as perfectly smooth and uniform as we are told, who or what delivered the first push? Where did the original spin come from that went on to infect every single particle of matter in existence? This is the paradox that quietly terrifies traditional cosmologists. They would rather celebrate the symmetry of the beginning than confront the mechanical impossibility it creates. But I have spent my entire career proving that the true nature of the cosmos lives not in its perfection, but in its original imperfections. Today, I am going to demonstrate in a way that cannot be dismissed that rotation is not some random side effect of gravity. It is the hidden engine of reality itself. And the real reason everything is spinning right now is going to completely shatter everything you thought you understood about gravity, time, and space. To expose the lie you have been fed your whole life, we first need to establish the most basic rules of motion. Picture a baseball thrown into the emptiness of deep space, no gravity pulling it sideways, no atmosphere slowing it down. That ball will travel in a perfectly straight line forever. This is what Isaac Newton established centuries ago. Objects resist changing direction. Left alone, everything moves in a straight line. But rotation is a completely different beast. Rotation is a constant, perpetual rebellion against the straight line. Every part of a spinning object is being forced to change direction every single millisecond. It requires continuous effort, and it obeys one ruthless and unbreakable rule: conservation of angular momentum. You have seen this play out with your own eyes. Watch a figure skater spinning on the ice, arms extended wide. The rotation is slow and graceful. The moment those arms are pulled tight against the chest, the skater becomes a blur of speed. No engine was added. No extra energy appeared from nowhere. The only change was that mass was brought closer to the center of rotation. The physics is absolute. Compress inward and the spin accelerates. The total rotation of the system cannot disappear, it must be preserved. Now scale that skater up to the size of the cosmos, and the story of how our universe truly began starts to crack open. Take that figure skater and expand the concept to a cloud of primordial gas stretching billions of kilometers across the darkness of early space. It floats there, nearly motionless but not completely. Perhaps a tiny current of particles drifts a few millimeters per second at a slightly different angle from the rest. An almost invisible brush of asymmetry, a microscopic whisper of imbalance. That is all it takes. Then the most ruthless architect in the universe enters gravity. It begins pulling all that scattered gas toward a central point. The enormous cloud starts collapsing violently under its own mass, destined to form a star and a surrounding disk of material. And what happens when something immense shrinks inward? Exactly what happened to the skater. That faint, ghostly original movement amplifies as the cloud compresses, transforming into a cosmic hurricane. This is how solar systems are born. This is how our own sun formed, along with the ring of dust and debris that eventually clumped together to build the Earth. The reason our planet spins today is simply the extraordinarily amplified echo of a tiny asymmetric motion in a gas cloud that existed billions of years ago. At this point, the standard textbook gives you a satisfied nod and declares the mystery solved. Gas clouds collapsed and preserved their spin case closed. But that explanation is intellectually cowardly because it completely sidesteps the real question. Where did that gas cloud get its original asymmetric movement in the first place? However microscopic that initial deviation was, it had to come from somewhere. And if you rewind the cosmic clock galaxy after galaxy, cloud after cloud, you arrive at the blazing plasma soup that filled the universe moments after its very origin. The more comfortable cosmologists want you to believe that the early universe was a beautifully homogeneous, perfectly even expansion. But we already established the problem with that picture. A perfectly symmetrical outward expansion produces no rotation whatsoever. If the universe had truly been perfect from its first second, particles would have traveled in straight lines forever. Gas clouds would have collapsed directly inward, with no sideways deviation, forming completely static stars with no orbiting planets, no moons, and certainly no us. The result would have been a dead, rigid, frozen universe. For you and me to exist here having this conversation, something immense, violent, and deeply irregular had to occur at the birth of space itself. Something had to inject the seed of rotation into the bloodstream of the cosmos. And to understand what that something was, we need to look toward the most terrifying regions that exist within our mathematics, places most people prefer to avoid because they break apart human intuition entirely. Scientists point us toward the oldest photograph of the universe. We have the cosmic microwave background radiation. When you look at that map, you see patches of color. Some regions slightly cooler, some slightly denser. Mainstream cosmologists tell you with confident smiles that these are simply quantum fluctuations, microscopic wrinkles in the fabric of space that were stretched enormously fast during the early expansion, and that these density differences created the gravity that eventually built everything we observe. They give you half the story and expect you not to notice the missing half. Yes, density differences cluster matter through gravity, but they are completely ignoring the most basic mechanical problem in the entire universe, the origin of spin. Follow this step by step and you will see the logical abyss that conventional cosmology is desperately trying to conceal. Imagine two enormous spheres of primitive gas floating in early space. One is slightly more massive than the other. Gravity activates and they attract each other, but gravity in its most basic, fundamental form pulls in a perfectly straight line, center of mass towards center of mass. If they collide head-on under that mutual pull, you get a titanic impact and massive compression. But you get zero rotation. The net angular momentum of that system remains exactly nothing. For rotation to emerge, for angular momentum to be born, forces must act from the side. Where does that lateral force come from in a universe that supposedly only expanded outward? The surface-level answer is gravitational interaction with neighboring structures. The early universe was not filled with clean, isolated spheres. It was a chaotic minefield of matter and energy. As one massive cloud collapsed under its own weight, the gravitational pull of another enormous nearby structure would tug harder on one side of the collapsing cloud than the other simply because one side was closer. The near side feels a stronger pull than the far side. Think of walking down a corridor in a straight line while someone enormous grabs your left shoulder and yanks you backward. Your body does not simply stop, it rotates violently on its own axis. This is how entire galaxies began to twist. They were forced into rotation by the asymmetric gravitational tug of their neighbors. But here is precisely where my thinking refuses to accept the official story, and yours should refuse it too. For this grand ballet of lateral pulls and structured collapses to have worked, the universe had to be born with a level of geometric precision so exact that it borders on the miraculous. In physics, we use the word entropy to measure disorder. A shattered ceramic cup on the floor has high entropy. An intact cup on a table has low entropy. The early universe had to possess an astronomically low gravitational entropy to allow ordered rotating galaxies to form rather than immediately collapsing into a useless tangle of random black holes. I sat down decades ago and calculated the precise volume of phase space required for the universe to begin in this state of geometric accuracy. The result was not a normal number. The odds of the universe emerging by pure chance in such a perfectly calibrated condition are 1 inch 10 raised to the power of 10 raised to the power of 123. Let that sink in. If you took every subatomic particle in the entire observable universe and wrote a 0 on each one, you would run out of particles enormously before completing that number. This is not a small improbability. It is absolute, cold, relentless precision. The universe did not explode in chaos. It was born with an underlying geometric structure that obligated space and time themselves to curve, distort, and allow matter to slide and twist into motion. And if you want to see the naked, violent face of this twisted geometry at its most extreme, you cannot keep looking at simple gas clouds. You have to go to the absolute limit of our mathematics. You have to enter the territory where gravity becomes so monstrous that it drags reality itself into a dark spiral. We were taught for a long time that space was an empty stage, a passive, inert backdrop against which stars and planets performed their dance. That was the comfortable misconception that dominated science until Albert Einstein forced the world to open its eyes with general relativity. Einstein proof, and I have dedicated my career to extending that proof, that space and time are not a static stage. They are a genuine physical fabric, something that can be bent, stretched, and brutally distorted. Most people nod along at this point. they have watched the popular documentaries. They have seen the image of a heavy bowling ball sinking into a rubber sheet to illustrate how gravity works, and they walk away satisfied. But that rubber sheet is a deeply misleading analogy that hides the true and terrifying paradox of cosmic rotation. Follow the logic carefully. If a space is a real physical fabric and you place a massive, stationary star within it, that star sinks into and curves a space around it. We know this. But now ask, what happens when that immense mass begins to spin? If a space were simply a passive void, the star would rotate and the surrounding space would remain completely unchanged. But a space is intimately entangled with matter. Imagine submerging a solid steel sphere into a jar of thick honey. If you rotate that steel sphere, the honey around it does not stay still. The friction from the spinning sphere drags the honey along with it, creating a perpetual swirling vortex. This is precisely what rotating matter does to the universe. We call it frame dragging. A massive rotating object literally pulls the fabric of reality along with it. Space itself enters rotation. This is not an elegant theoretical idea on an academic's chalkboard. It is an experimentally confirmed physical fact. Satellites currently orbiting Earth must continuously correct their trajectories because our planet's rotation subtly twists the surrounding space. Earth's effect is a whisper. But to confront the truly mind-paralyzing version of this phenomenon, we must carry this dragging of reality to its most monstrous extreme. We must look directly into the heart of a rotating black hole. When a supermassive star exhausts its fuel and collapses under its own gravity to form a black hole, all of that original rotation we discussed gets compressed. The spin becomes so overwhelmingly violent that the fabric of space-time is dragged at an incomprehensible rate. This is where basic physics breaks completely, and our true paradox is born. Around a rotating black hole forms a remarkable region called the ergosphere. Inside this zone, space itself is being dragged faster than the speed of light. Read that sentence again, because it dismantles your common sense. The most inviolable law of modern physics states that no mass can move through space faster than light. But that law does not prohibit space itself from moving. If you were inside the ergosphere, you could fire your spacecraft's engines at full power, aim precisely against the direction of the black hole's rotation, burning every drop of fuel in a desperate attempt to hold still, and it would be completely, pathetically useless. You would be dragged inexorably in the direction of the spin, not because you are moving through space, but because space itself beneath you flows like an unstoppable river. Here is the fundamental paradox. From your perspective inside the ship, you are accelerating at maximum thrust, fighting with every ounce of force available. Yet from the perspective of the outside universe, you are being carried at titanic velocity. You are stationary within your patch of space, but that patch of space is in perpetual circular freefall. Matter does not command the rotation of the universe. It is the dark, twisted geometry of space-time that holds us all as prisoners. Space is what rotates. We are simply carried along by the current. Now let us destroy the most popular, comfortable, and oversimplified image in all of modern cosmology. When people describe a black hole, they inevitably picture a dark pit terminating in a single static point at the bottom, a mathematical point of infinite density, where matter is crushed out of existence and every known law of physics surrenders and dies. We call this a singularity. A large portion of my less imaginative colleagues cling to this idea of a simple point because it is manageable, easy to explain on television, and convenient to sketch on a whiteboard. But every single one of them forgets the fundamental rule we have now firmly established. Nothing in the universe holds still. Everything rotates. And when a massive star collapses, dragging the fabric of space and time with it, that original angular momentum does not magically vanish. It is preserved, compressed, and becomes mathematically monstrous. Apply the logic of everyday experience. Take a ball of pizza dough and spin it rapidly in the air. The centrifugal force pushes mass outward. The center flattens and the edges expand. The physics of rotation is hostile to perfect spheres, and it is especially hostile to points. At the heart of a real rotating black hole, the rotational forces are so astonishingly violent that the singularity cannot maintain itself as a simple geometric point. The mathematics of what is known as the Kerr metric demonstrates this without mercy. The extreme spin pushes that infinite mass outward from center, stretching and deforming it until it becomes a perfect ring, a rotating ring singularity. Infinitely thin, possessing no physical thickness, yet carrying along its edge a gravitational force equivalent to millions of suns. And here is where your biological mind will fight against reality. If the singularity is a ring, then by pure basic geometry, it has a hole in the middle, a void at its center. Imagine falling toward this supermassive rotating black hole. but your trajectory is aligned with mathematical perfection to pass directly through the rotational pole straight down the central axis. You descend. You cross the event horizon. An absolute darkness envelops you. But unlike what you were taught, you are not crushed. You do not disintegrate against a wall of infinite mass, because there is no point waiting at the bottom to receive you. You glide smoothly through the geometric center of that infinite ring, pass through the opening, and when you cross the exact center of that rotating structure, you do not emerge on the other side of the same universe. You enter an entirely new geometric structure, one that the rotation has carved into the fabric of reality. A hidden region of space-time where the mathematics tell us that distances become negative and gravity completely inverts. The force that was pulling you relentlessly now repels you with equal violence. But that is not what will break your understanding. What is truly disturbing is what this massive rotating ring does to the dimension of time itself. The frame dragging from this ring is so severe, it twists reality so completely that near it space and time exchange their roles. If you attempt to move in a circle around this ring singularity, you are not orbiting through physical space, you are orbiting through time itself. You are traversing what physicists call closed time-like curves. Your inevitable future curves back and collides directly with your own past. Complete one full orbit along that mathematical path, and you do not return to the physical location where you started. You return to the moment in time before you began moving, arriving well before you ever departed. The asymmetric spin of the universe has taken the straight, one-directional arrow of time and bent it into a closed loop, shattering the sacred and foundational law of cause and effect. Everything we have uncovered so far leads us to the most important unanswered question. Who pushed the first domino? How was the original asymmetry born, the one that forced all matter in the cosmos to begin rotating? The answer I'm going to give you now does not appear in any standard textbook. It is the hard truth that orthodox cosmology refuses to accept, because it dismantles piece by piece the comfortable story of an absolute beginning. We are told the universe began billions of years ago and has been expanding ever since. Follow that timeline forward to the very end of everything. Physics dictates the conclusion. Every star will burn through its fuel and die in the cold vacuum. Galaxies will drift apart until they vanish beyond the reach of observation. Eventually, the only structures remaining will be the supermassive black holes. But even they are not immortal. Quantum physics tells us that black holes slowly evaporate, leaking their immense mass away as radiation across trillions upon trillions of years. Follow this mathematical logic without flinching. A moment will arrive unimaginably distant, unimaginably cold when the last black hole completes its evaporation. The entire universe becomes a vast, featureless ocean of photons, simple particles of light drifting through infinite emptiness. This is where the university story ends. But this is precisely where conventional thinking stops and a more rigorous deduction takes over. Here is what you must understand about light. Photons carry no mass. And according to the relentless rules of pure relativity, for anything traveling exactly at the speed of light, time simply ceases to exist. For a photon, the moment of its birth and the moment of its death are the same instant, regardless of whether it has just crossed the diameter of the entire universe. If the far future universe consists exclusively of massless photons, then by strict mathematical definition, the universe loses the concept of time entirely. Nothing ages, no clock ticks, and if there is no time, there is no meaningful measure of space either. The physical distinction between an infinitely large universe and an infinitely small point loses all meaning what physicists call scale invariance. A dead universe full of cold, infinitely diluted light becomes mathematically identical to an infinitely hot, compressed soup of particles. Our Big Bang was not the beginning of everything. It was the geometric continuation of the end of the previous universe. I call this conformal cyclic cosmology, and it changes everything. We exist within one link in an infinite chain of successive universes. And right here, at this impossible boundary, the mystery of cosmic rotation finally finds its complete answer. In the universe that preceded ours, supermassive black holes existed, consuming stars and spinning furiously exactly as ours do today. When those ancient monsters collided, the violence generated titanic gravitational waves, spiral impulses of twisted energy propagating at the speed of light through the fabric of space. When that previous universe died and its cold mathematical endpoint transformed into the blazing dawn of our own universe, that rotational energy did not disappear. It crossed the boundary. The spiraling gravitational waves from the collisions of a dead universe left scars in our newly born space primordial vortices embedded in the hot plasma of our creation. That is the spark. That is the lateral push we have been searching for since the very beginning of this journey, not a random quantum miracle. Everything in our universe spins today because it inherited the ghostly momentum of black holes that died in an era before our time even existed. The evidence for this is observable right now. If you take the thermal map of the cosmic microwave background and apply precise mathematical filtering, you find enormous concentric circles in the sky, vast rings, where the temperature of space is inexplicably more uniform than the surrounding quantum noise. These are exactly what you would expect if a massive energy release from a dying black hole in the previous universe crossed the transition boundary and sent an immense spherical shockwave through our primordial matter. I call these Hawking points, and they are the undeniable physical signature of black holes that died before our time. The next time you look up at the night sky and watch the stars burning in the infinite dark, do not see them as an unsolvable mystery. See them as the heavy gears of a cosmic clock that was already turning long before the time of our universe began to count. The rotation of the heavens is not an accident of gravity. It is the living scar of a cycle that had no beginning and will have no end, a perpetual, ruthless, and mechanically beautiful engine of existence. If this shattered any assumption you held about the universe, share this with someone who is ready to have their understanding rebuilt from the ground up. Subscribe for more physics that refuses to flinch at the hard questions. And drop a comment below. Do you believe the universe is truly cyclic, or does the idea of no absolute beginning unsettle you? Let's push the boundary of this conversation together.